Hey everyone, it's Blake here from ChessPathways.com, and in today's openings video, we're going to be discussing the Scotch Gambit. The Scotch Gambit starts out as a Scotch game, so that's e4, e5, knight f3, black defends the pawn with knight c6, and now white plays d4 trying to open up the center. And I made a video on this opening. I'll go ahead and put a link to that down in the description. But after black takes here on d4, instead of recapturing this pawn like we see in the Scotch game, the Scotch Gambit involves this move bishop to c4. White just doesn't take back that material for now, and tries to accelerate their lead in development and take aim at this weak f7 square. Black has several ways to play against this gambit. Knight f6 is their most popular move, just developing a piece and putting our e4 pawn under attack. So we can take a look at that first, and then we'll come back to this position and discuss black's alternatives. So if black plays knight to f6 here, then there's two ways that white can play. The most obvious move might be e5, simply kicking this knight away and trying to grab some more space, but black will often meet this move by playing d5 and counterattacking this bishop. Of course, white could take en passant in this position, but it's not very appealing. After e takes d6, we're really just helping black to develop, so that's almost never played. Also, taking the knight doesn't look so great. If we take the knight, then black just simply gets to take our bishop. Now they have the bishop pair, they've undoubled their pawns, and these pawns are both very strong. And something like f takes g7 and bishop takes g7 seems to give black a very active position here. So instead, after black plays d5, white will usually play bishop to b5 and pin this knight. Now this knight kind of has to save itself here, so it usually comes into e4. And now we see knight takes d4, taking aim at this pinned knight. And white is going to be able to wreck black's pawn structure. After bishop d7, white can simply take there on c6, and black is going to get doubled pawns. They usually take with the b pawn first, just to maintain their pair of bishops here, and we're left with a pretty interesting imbalance here. White has the better pawn structure, and white has this far advanced e5 pawn, but black does have the pair of bishops, and black could try to get these pawns rolling later on with something like c5 and d4. I'll just show one of the main lines here. White can go ahead and castle, get that king out of the center, which you should always do. And then after bishop c5, white tries to get their kingside pawns rolling here. They play f3 to gain a tempo on this knight. The knight has to come to g5. It's really the knight's only square. And now white can play f4 and attack it again. And after the knight comes back to e4, white's just going to break this pin to their king. And we see that white's getting some menacing pawns rolling here on the king side, and black's going to have to watch out for that. So that was what can happen after e5, after black plays knight f6. White can also just allow black to take this pawn and go ahead and castle. Now this is something you see quite a bit in king's pawn openings. White just castles, and it's always kind of dangerous for black to take the e4 pawn, because then white would put a rook on this file, and there would be a pin there on the king. But in this position, it looks like this isn't going to work out so well for white, because after knight takes e4, rook e1, black has this nice move d5, which not only defends the knight, but also attacks the bishop. And this would be true if not for some tactics that are present in this position. White can play here bishop takes d5, intending to meet queen takes d5 with knight to c3, a very nice move. This knight is attacked twice by the pawn and the knight, but it can't be taken either way because of these pins by the queen and rook. That means the queen has to move away, and white's going to win their piece back here. Knight takes e4, black should seal off the e-file to prevent any discoveries here. Bishop e6, knight e to g5 is the main line. And just to show a little bit more, black can go ahead and castle, get their king out of the center. White's going to win a pawn back. Knight takes e6, f takes e6, rook takes e6. And once again, we get a pretty interesting position here. Black has a pawn majority on the queen side, 4 against 3, whereas white has a king side pawn majority, 3 against 2. That could be a prevailing factor, possibly in an endgame. And also we see the kings are castled on opposite sides, and that usually gives both sides additional attacking opportunities. Black usually just plays bishop d6 here to finish up their development, and white has many ways to play here. I think bishop g5 is a popular move, just finishing up white's development as well, and attacking this d8 rook. I should mention here, after white castles in response to knight f6, we looked at taking here on e4. Black doesn't have to play that. Black could play bishop c5 right now, but now e5 might be a bit more appealing here to white. This is sometimes considered a line from the Italian game. We see the bishop on c4 and the bishop on c5 now, called the Max Lange attack here. So this is often considered a separate opening from the Scotch Gambit, but I did want to make you aware that we can transpose here. The point is now, after d5, white can take on f6, black can take on c4, but now this rook is able to join the party here because white has castled. and after rook to e1, bishop e6, knight g5, we get a very complex game. Alright, so we've looked at a lot of the main lines after knight f6 against the Scotch Gambit. Let's take a look at black's second most popular move, which is to play bishop to c5, just developing a piece, and now defending this d4 pawn after white failed to take it back on their last turn. There are some pretty exciting lines here as well. We can start by considering just castling here for white, and black will most often just play knight to f6, finishing up their kingside development, and this will actually lead back to the max range attack that we just looked at. Obviously, playing knight f6 and then meeting castling with bishop c5 is the exact same thing as playing bishop c5 and then meeting castling with knight f6. Just to show it one more time, if white plays e5, we see d5, e takes f6, d takes c4, rook e1, bishop e6, and knight g5. So some lines like that are possible. Instead, that was after castling. White could play c3 here, trying to take back their pawn here in the center and get the full center there with their pawns. And this actually sets a nice little trap. If black tries to take this pawn, now white has a nice move here, bishop takes f7. That's the danger to black in all these openings where the bishop's lined up here on this f7 pawn. You never know when these tactics are going to appear if you don't calculate properly. And after king takes f7, queen d5 check, we see that white's going to get their piece back here, and white would have a very good game after something like king e8, queen takes c5, because of course the king is now unable to castle. So instead, after c3, black should actually not take this pawn. Black's most popular move is just to once again play knight to f6, and e5 would be possible here. It would once again be met by d5, but more commonly, white is just going to transpose into one of the main lines from the Italian game, where white takes this pawn in the center, and it looks like white has the full center now. They're ready to start bullying these knights by advancing, but black has a way to get out of this here. They can give a check here. White's going to play bishop d2 to make sure that they can defend their e4 pawn, because after the bishop exchanges, white can take with the knight, and now black is just in time to play d5 and grab some central space for themselves. And again, this line is known from the Italian game. There's always going to be some similarities there because white put this bishop on c4 very early on in the opening. Perhaps white's most aggressive move here against this bishop c5 move is to play knight to g5, just adding a second attacker here to the f7 pawn, almost reminiscent of a fried liver attack, except here black can't even play d5, so what's black going to do? This move is kind of setting a nice little trap. You would think that black could play knight to e5, just defending the f7 pawn and attacking the bishop at the same time, but this is actually not very good for black. Go ahead and pause your video if you want to think about what white could play here. But okay, if you're back with me, white can play bishop takes f7 anyways, kind of a surprising blow, but the point is once again this bishop is loose, and after knight takes f7, knight takes f7, king takes f7, queen h5 check, g6, and queen takes c5, white is doing very well in this position. The king can't castle, and this d4 pawn is probably falling very soon. So instead, coming back here after knight to g5, black should instead play knight to h6. That's their only good move to defend this pawn. And white can use the same tactic here, but it's not going to be as effective. After, for example, knight takes f7, knight takes f7, bishop takes f7, king takes f7, there's still queen to h5, but now after g6 and queen takes c5, the position here is different now. We see that in that other line with knight e5, it was the c6 knight that got exchanged off, but in this line, it's the other knight that got exchanged off. And this is a big improvement for black. It means that instead of having a knight on g8, they have a knight on c6. And that means this d4 pawn is better protected, and black can play d5 now in this position. Just opening up their bishop and intending to meet e takes d5 with rook e8 check, which would be annoying for white. And black is actually doing fine in this position. So that's the key for black to know here. If you want to play the bishop c5 line against the Scotch Gambit and white plays knight g5, make sure you play knight h6 and not knight e5 to defend your pawn. Coming back to our starting position of the Scotch Gambit, we've looked at knight f6, black's most popular move, and then we've looked at bishop c5, which is their second most popular move. Black has two other moves here that they play pretty frequently, and they often lead to the same kind of position. So let's look at them now. One is to play bishop e7, just developing a piece and also taking away the g5 square from the white knight possibly, so that black doesn't have to worry about threats to the f7 pawn as much. But here, white has induced black to make a passive move here with the bishop, and they're usually content just to switch back to the Scotch game, just take on d4 and get their pawn back, and now black's options are a little reduced here compared to what they would have in a Scotch game. For example, it wouldn't make sense now for black to play bishop c5 in most lines, because they're going to get a worse version of some mainline Scotch game lines because they took an extra move with this bishop. The game might go d6, castle, knight f6, knight c3, castle, h3, just preventing bishop g4 and knight g4, rook e8, rook e1, and white seems to have a small advantage, just like they usually get in the mainline Scotch game. Alternatively here, back after bishop c4, our starting position for the Scotch Gambit, black could play d6, and this often leads to the same kind of thing. White's just going to take their pawn back, knight takes d4, knight f6, castle, bishop e7, knight c3, castle. Leads to pretty much the same kind of position as the bishop e7 line does. So the bottom line here is that if black does not play knight f6 or bishop c5, white is probably going to be happy just to take their pawn back and just play a normal Scotch game position, and the game will go from there. Thanks for watching, everyone, and please make sure you click the link down in the description to visit chesspathways.com and get signed up there. It's totally free, only takes 5 seconds, all you need is an email address, and I will send you a free move-by-move guide to chess thinking when you join. So please let me help you become the best chess player you can be and join our community. Thanks, and I'll see you there.